Hey everyone, and thanks for joining today. For those who don't know, I'm Carolyn Weiss, and I am the Executive Director of the Oceans Caucus Foundation. We support the Senate and House Oceans Caucuses by highlighting ocean conservation and management issues on the Hill and among our stakeholders. Our Oceans Caucus co-chairs have been able to come together on a number of topics, one being the importance of U.S. investment in ocean research and technology in an effort to better understand our marine environment. So much of our daily lives is dependent on the goods and services the ocean provides, and yet we still know so little about it. I'm going to get right into our programming so we can hear from a couple of our oceans leaders in the Senate, and then have the bulk of our time hearing from our panelists. First, we have Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island and Senate Oceans Caucus co-chair. He's been leading the ocean conversation on the Hill from fighting IUU fishing, marine debris, climate change, coastal resilience, and ocean data and observation. He's a co-sponsor of every piece of ocean ledge out there, but in particular is a sponsor of the reintroduced Blue Globe Act, as well as National Ocean Exploration Act, along with Senator Wicker. So, Senator, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Carolyn, and best wishes to you and to David and John and the whole ICCF OCF team. This all came together because the International Conservation Caucus Foundation saw an opportunity to support our oceans work and started its Ocean Caucus Foundation, which brings us together. So I owe many thanks to everybody who participated in that. It has been one of the more successful caucuses in the Senate. We have done a lot of good work on fisheries, treaties, enabling legislation, all passed through the Senate by unanimous consent, and two significant oceans plastics bills, SOS and SOS 2.0, all done. So we have in the ocean space, even in a harshly divided country, a pretty solid record of bipartisan success. And we really want to build on that in this Congress. The two immediate tasks that we have coming up before us right now, one is to try to get an oceans platform into Build Back Better. And if we can't get it into Build Back Better, then try to put what Lisa Murkowski, my colleague in all of this, and I are calling the Big Blue Bill. But I think if you say Big Blue Bill and to Build Back Better, you end up with way too much alliteration. So we're going to have to work on that. But I think this is a moment to pass significant legislation, including funding. We were able to get funding for coasts in the United States, but it's only been about $100 million so far, $35 million in an appropriation cycle. And we were able to get $75 million for international ocean plastics so that when the US returns to that table, they've got something to bring to the table with them. But you could add a zero onto each of those numbers and you still would barely be meeting the need, if at all. So we're going to try to push those numbers up quite a lot. The last thing is that John Kerry is about as oceansy a person in government as there is. He and I were doing ocean stuff when nobody else was in the Senate. And he made sure that oceans got into the Paris Agreement. And when, believe it or not, there was an effort to strip ocean stuff out. And now as we head for Glasgow, which I think is going to dwarf Paris in its effect and in its ambition, it's good to know that we've got somebody leading the United States team like John, who's going to make sure that oceans are a big part of Glasgow. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure we've got a really good package for Glasgow and to make sure that our Big Blue Bill either joins Build Back Better or gets through in some fashion on its own. And we are able to do that work and get the bipartisan support that we can, in large part because of the good work of the International Conservation Caucus Foundation and the Ocean Caucus Foundation being able to reassure everybody that this is going to be okay. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Senator. And as always, we appreciate your leadership on all things oceans, and we look forward to seeing what you can do this Congress. So next, we also have Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi, who's emerged as a top oceans leader in the Senate over the years. He's a leader on the Armed Services, Commerce, and EPW committees, which all deal with policies impacting our oceans. He's provided us with some remarks for our event today, highlighting the need to learn more about our ocean environment and has recently reintroduced National Ocean Exploration Act. So we'll go ahead and play that.
The ocean has always captivated our imaginations and been essential to economic activity. Ocean exploration has yielded new discoveries, improved food security, strengthened commerce, and spurred technological innovation. However, our understanding of the ocean and its natural processes are limited because of the difficulties of operating at the sea and around it. Our current methods for mapping, exploring, and characterizing the deep sea environment are inadequate, leaving over 80% of the ocean floor unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored. Promoting ocean exploration is important to me and to those of us on the Senate Commerce Committee. In early February, I reintroduced the National Ocean Exploration Act, along with Senators Cantwell, Schatz, Murkowski, and Whitehouse. This act would make ocean exploration a national priority and would further ensure American leadership in the blue economy. This bipartisan legislation would serve as a catalyst for new underwater discoveries by encouraging multi-sector partnerships and ensuring that the ocean remains a valuable source of American prosperity. Many Americans know about the technological revolution and scientific advances that occurred during the space race, but few have heard about the innovation and discovery that have occurred as America paved the way to the deepest depths of the ocean. To boost this awareness, the National Ocean Exploration Act would require NOAA to develop an outreach strategy to celebrate the discoveries made by the Ocean Exploration Program. Mississippi will help pave the way into the next era of scientific discovery on both Mars and the deep sea, and Americans should know about both. The keys to unlocking the mysteries of the deep sea are more data and observations. Our ships alone cannot provide these. To address this need, I have advocated for the strategic use of uncrewed maritime systems, including through the passage of my Commercial Engagement Through Ocean Technology, or CNOTE Act, which became law on December 21st, 2018. CNOTE expanded NOAA's mission to include the use of uncrewed maritime systems to advance our knowledge of events above and below the surface of the water. Uncrewed maritime systems are already a force multiplier for NOAA, and we need to increase their use for ocean exploration. The University of Southern Mississippi is one of the world's elite oceanographic centers that is developing the technology to explore and map the ocean's depths. USM is leading the way in uncrewed maritime systems and building a workforce for the blue economy through its Unmanned Maritime Systems Certificate Program. The technology that USM develops and the students that are educated there will improve our hydrographic maps, discover new undersea life, and enhance offshore energy production. As a nation, we need coordination across the federal government, partnerships with industry, and a sense of excitement to drive ocean exploration. The ocean is a frontier that is ready for discovery.
Thank you, Senator. So before I get to our panel, I would like to point out the chat box on the right of all of your screens on the YouTube Live link. So please use this chat box to submit any questions you would like our panelists to answer when we open it up to audience questions closer to the end. So now I'd like to pass it along to our moderator, Johann Berganos with Waxman Strategies, who is going to lead our discussion this morning. Johann has been a longtime partner of our organization, working with us on how oceans issues intersect with global and national security and economic priorities. Johann, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you for leading a great program at ICCF. And thanks to Senators Wicker and Whitehouse for being leaders in Congress with a strong and growing cohort of oceans champions. I'm Johann Berganos, as Carolyn said. I'm with Waxman Strategies. I'm not going to be able to frame this conversation as well as one of our panelists have framed himself, which you will see in a second with a beautiful garment behind him. But I will do my very best here to generally point us in the direction of where the discussion is going to go. As Senator Whitehouse and Wicker said, we're having this discussion to make the case to increase resources towards the ocean economy and the oceans more broadly. And the reason to why that is needed is because what I call the 5 U's of oceans. Oceans are unhealthy, they're unknown, they're unconnected, they're under-prioritized, and they are underfunded. But that's not it. The reason to why that is so important is because the 5 U's have significant societal problems that has to do with our national economy, national security, climate, biodiversity, energy, food, and public health. So these are critical links between oceans and society. So that's the doom and gloom. There's plenty of reasons to be hopeful here. Number one, oceans represent one of the most untapped opportunities to survive and build resiliency on some of the issues that we just mentioned. And some of our panelists are going to talk what they do in real time on these issues. Secondly, we're seeing a much more strategic approach to the oceans and its resources, and we need to further that collaboration further. And finally, as is on display here today, we are seeing continued bipartisan support for ocean issues, and we're seeing continuity in government on oceans issues, in no small part by some of the appointments that have been made over the last few weeks at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, at the Department of Commerce, and of course, Envoy John Kerry is an oceans champion. So I'm going to turn it over to our 3 panelists. They are very Googleable people, so I'm not going to go through their distinguished careers, more than to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and what they do. And then I'm going to throw some questions at them and really look forward to your questions as well over the next half an hour or so. So let's start with Alan Leonardi, who is with NOAA. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Johann. Happy to be here. I want to thank ICCF and the Oceans Caucus Foundation for sponsoring this event and inviting me to participate. And of course, thanks Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Senator Roger Wicker for their championship, their long-time championship of ocean issues in the Senate. Really appreciate your support. I am with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I wear 2 significant hats in that role. I am both the director of the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, leading the only federal government organization that is dedicated to exploring the ocean. And I am also the co-chair of the National Ocean Mapping, Exploration, and Characterization Council. A council stood up under the auspices of the Ocean Policy Committee and the Subcommittee on Ocean Science and Technology to serve as a coordinating mechanism across all government agencies to make sure that our USEEZ is fully mapped and that the priority areas that are identified that benefit all are explored and characterized to our maximum extent. Happy to be here today and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Alan. Brad, over to you.
Thank you, Johann, and good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Ack. It's a great pleasure to be with you all this morning. I have spent the entirety of my 30-year plus professional career working on solutions to a variety of really challenging environmental problems. And the last 17 of those years have been focused on the oceans. First as executive director of the Puget Sound Recovery Program in Washington State, regional director for the Marine Stewardship Council, and then senior vice president for oceans at World Wildlife Fund. I now have the pleasure of serving as the executive director of Ocean Visions, which is a partnership of leading academic and oceanographic institutions that work alongside a whole range of practitioners, innovators, inventors, NGOs, and others to identify and catalyze solutions to some of the ocean's most pressing problems. We're really focused on applied science, engineering, and innovation. And so while we're very much in support of the call for continued exploration in basic science, we believe firmly that we have to greatly increase the resources for applied research and development of interventions to the most critical crises in the oceans. Throughout my career, I've seen us get ever better at measuring the rate and pace of decline in our environment and the magnitude of the really horrific losses that we've suffered, at least across the 30-year span of my career. And at this point, I would argue that we have to refocus our intellectual and physical and financial resources on designing interventions to address the causes of the decline. And right now, by far, the biggest, bar none, is the climate crisis in the ocean. The two largest stressors are a direct result of this climate crisis: thermal stress and chemical stress. They're both a direct result of carbon pollution. And the ocean sciences and conservation community doesn't really have an adequate response to these two stressors at the moment. So at Ocean Visions, we're working with a range of partners, different sectors and disciplines to change that. And I look forward to telling you more about that work as we get into the panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brad. Dr. Chow, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Johann. Thank you for the entire team to put this event together, provide the opportunity for me to say a few words on ocean tech. My name's Yi Chow, founder and CEO of Early Stage startup company in California. I have a PhD in oceanography, went through a traditional career as a scientist, did a postdocs, and then started my first job at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. Worked there for 20 years, worked on satellite oceanography, computational oceanography, developed the technology which is ready to be commercialized. So I left NASA 5 years ago, found the C track to commercialize this technology to develop renewable energy for underwater robotics. Really try to develop the healthy blue tech ecosystem, similar as the biotech, the clean tech, and to support the blue economy. Focus on innovation and then more specifically accelerate the transition of technology R&D to commercial applications, and then really try to build the ecosystem so we can support the blue economy as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, E. So we'll dig into all of these questions more deeply, but I think what you saw here in terms of who we have brought together, this is a group of doers of the great work that has happened on the Hill and what needs to happen moving forward. They're not afraid to get their hands wet, so to speak, in actually implementing programming and political and policy objectives. And as you also saw, there are government, public, private, and innovators on this panel. So there's a very diverse group of folks here that I'm excited about picking on a little bit. So Alan, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit over the last few years, and maybe as you look ahead, what hurdles that you see that you currently have in implementing, impactful programming in your office, that some of the new legislative initiatives that are either being recently passed or are underway, including the Natural Ocean Exploration Act, the Blue Globe Act, or any other acts that you see can help or needs to be further advanced to really maximize your impact and your office work?
Yeah, thanks, Johann. I really appreciate the question. And I will say this, is that despite the valiant efforts across sectors and the significantly increased attention and support by both the executive and the legislative branches, we still know very little about the deep ocean. And the bottom line is we simply can't make sound science-based management and policy decisions without having that critical data about our marine environment. The acts that you mentioned, and many before that, including the C-Note legislation, really seek to improve not just awareness of ocean issues, but to improve the fundamental research and development, the exploration that goes into them, with an eye towards tying that data and information to practical solutions that benefit humanity. Without these championship type efforts and this type of legislation, we may not exist, or we might not have the resources that we need. And I will point out that the Congress has been exceedingly generous in this regard over the last few years. We today still don't know the locations of, the quantities and qualities of, or even the full importance of a lot of the biological and the physical marine resources that are in the ocean. And these acts are intentionally designed to focus attention on that, to try to establish across governments and through legislation an ocean policy committee that focuses on policies that are relevant from an ocean perspective, that support humanity, support the economy, support our safety and security, but also that improve our fundamental understanding of the ocean. In the coming decades, protein is going to be increasingly important as we seek ways to feed the next billion people on our planet. The oceans already, we know, moderate climate in known ways and will become more important. And what some people don't know is some of the most important medicines and novel therapeutics will likely increasingly be coming from the ocean. These acts focusing attention on our ocean issues, on exploring the ocean, on tying that data and information to a better understanding of the resources that we have, the importance that they and role that they carry in supporting humanity, and using that information to support, as Brad noted, solutions to today's pressing issues to ensure a sustainable ocean are really what we're looking at. So I would say that the biggest hurdle to date has been the limited ability across congressional, the legislative branch and the executive branch to come together to say, yes, this is important. I think that is happening increasingly today and over the last few years. And even maybe more importantly is all sectors are banding together to say that this is an important issue. We know that we can't go it alone, and that we understand that in order to understand, appreciate, benefit from, and sustain the oceans, a rising tide floats all boats. We need to do this together. So I would say that the hurdles have been there, the barriers have been there. We know that funding is always a challenge, but I think that the political and the social will is there today that hadn't fully been there in the previous couple of decades to really serve as a launching off point to truly have this be a national priority.
Thanks, Alan. And we can probably go back a little bit later to the specific societal benefits that you raised. And thank you for raising one of the U's that I talked about, which is the unknown. I think it was the second one, which ties very nicely into what Brad said in his opening statement, which I want to drill down a little bit in. The lack of science and data for someone who's trying to forge public-private sector partnerships for ocean solutions or problems. Can you tell us a little bit about what the implications of that is and what the potential you would have at your disposal if you had more data and more knowledge?
Thanks for that question, Johann. You know, again, I mean, I think we have enough data to know that we need to be greatly accelerating our focus on action. I take the point that we can always use more to calibrate, but I don't think that the ocean community has had enough focus at this point on actually testing and designing interventions to begin to slow down some of the really dangerous changes that are happening. You know, we have an enormous focus in the ocean community on plastics, for example, which is truly a really difficult problem. But we have 2 orders of magnitude more pollution going into the ocean in the form of carbon dioxide than plastics, something along the lines of, you know, 140 billion tons of excess carbon have gone into the oceans versus 200 million tons of plastic. So what I would argue is that we need the science focused on solutions. So it's definitely still a need for science, but it has to be applied, meaning what is the information and the monitoring and the modeling that we have to have in order to figure out how to recalibrate some of these systems, how to take carbon out of the ocean and out of the atmosphere, because it's really the most critical driving threat to the future of our ocean and our planet.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that. So let me take your call for applied projects and applied action over to Dr. Chow, who is, you know, by the nature of his current work and where he was coming from, is really a case in point here. Dr. Chow had a professorship that he left to try his product into the field and see if it could be developed into a business. So tell us a little bit, Dr. Chow, you made the leap from academia into your startup. What is it that stands between you and successfully scaling the product that you have developed over the next few years or over the next decade, if you will, since that's how we sort of measuring the current ocean science and technology space?
Yeah, thanks for that question. A lot of these challenging grand challenge problems, as described by Alan, require innovation. So innovation in terms of renewable energy space is also a key to power the blue economy in the coming decades. We have a very exciting opportunity in the coming decade. We are the start of the robotic revolution. More and more autonomous systems deploy in the ocean, complementary to the ships we have. Power this underwater robotic with renewable energy is certainly a future direction to scale up the entire industry. We certainly need to look into the government to provide policies and incentive for the use of the renewable energy as much as we can, as compared to traditional, more dirty and cheaper alternatives. And then similar to gasoline versus electric cars. And then for us as early stage development, so that we can have a level playing field to really scale up the industry, build a healthy industries, ocean tech ecosystem, and to develop the community to support the blue economy.
So let me follow up on that, Dr. Chow. So you have an innovation. You spoke about robotics, autonomous vehicles. Who do you need to get in? What sectors, what ocean sectors do you need to get in front of to prove your cost effectiveness, environmental, or other value add? Who is it in the ocean economy that your technology and innovation and some of the other sectors need to come to the table?
Yeah, a few sectors come to my mind. What Alan talked about, ocean exploration, for example, more than 80–90% of the seafloor remain unmapped. That's a classic example. Require innovation in this space to scale up the industry, really to meet the challenge in the coming decade to map the seafloor so that we can have better knowledge, better understanding on how to manage and the ocean resources. Ocean observing is another example. We need more ocean data to improve hurricane prediction, for example, particularly the intensity forecast for the hurricanes. We need information to support aquaculture, particularly as they move offshore, so that we can scale up the production of aquaculture, try to place US in at least the leadership position and top 10. We're not in the top 10 in the seaweed farming, for example. We have ambitious goals to also helping the maritime shipping industry to provide information to reduce their fuel, optimize their route, and then reduce the carbon footprint as well. Those are the few examples coming to my mind.
Thank you. And I'll get back later on the policy and regulatory discussion around those sectors. Before I go back to Alan, can you give me that stat that I heard you speak about once in terms of with current technology and innovation, how long and how costly it will be to map, explore, and categorize the world's ocean? And I'm sorry I'm putting you on the spot now if you don't have it handy.
Is this for me, Johann?
Dr. Chow, I've heard him talk these costs and this time before. I don't think you can hear me. Oh, you can hear me? Go ahead, Dr. Chow.
I'm sorry. I saw that's a question for Alan. For seafloor mapping, as example, in the Southern Hemisphere, very few ships travels. So we have very little knowledge. We want to map the gap of those seafloor maps. Current operation is extremely expensive with ships, with surface vehicles. We need to deploy two or three older magnitude more robotic systems underwater, so we can fill the gap of the seafloor maps and to really scale up this mapping industry.
Thank you. I think what I was trying to get at was that and this goes to you, Alan, the stat that I've heard is that with current ships and current state of technology, we're talking about dozens and dozens of years before we can map, categorize, and explore the ocean. We're talking about very, very expensive and slightly older technology. So I'll let you take this in whatever direction you want, but let's say that as part of this legislative path that we're on, your office's resources and maybe the US government resources more broadly will get a significant boost instead of millions, billions of dollars to your disposal, what would be the return on that investment? And at what speed would you be able to implement programming if you had significantly more resources?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Johann. I would say this is that some of our estimates saying that using current technologies, ships outfitted with sonar systems, just to map the full extent of the deep water portions of the US EEZ, and by deep I mean 200 meters and deeper, all the way out to the full extent of US waters, that will take probably on average about $10 million a year for 10 years. So that's $100 million using traditional methods. So that's doable, and it can be done. It's in the shallow water domain where you really have a big problem, because it takes decidedly more days at sea to cover a similar area, the shallower you get, because of the way that the sonar systems work. The footprint gets smaller, and so it takes more days at sea. And so it's really kind of an untenable path if you think about mapping all of the coastal and the deep water portions of the globe. I'm just giving you numbers for the US EEZ, right? A very small portion of the planet. So you're talking hundreds of years using current technologies that are ship-based. If you add into that mix force multiplying technologies like uncrewed systems, which are becoming increasingly readily available today from private industry, backed by many decades of research and support a lot by the defense sectors, that is going to happen a lot faster. And we believe that at least for the US portion of the world's oceans, we can get that done by 2040, but it's going to require these force multiplying technologies. And that really is going to involve us partnering with industry and academia and all sectors. So if we saw a huge increase in an influx in resources, there's probably a couple of things that we would focus on. And I'm talking just mapping at this point. I would like to say that truly exploring and truly characterizing these deep water habitats is an exponential task. Okay, but if we were to see an influx, an infusion of additional resources from wherever, I'd first be looking to fill all available white space on any ship that has the ability to do mapping. If they're out there operating, let's make sure that they're mapping. If they're sitting in port because they don't have a paying job, let's get them a paying job. Second, we need to, within the next 5 years, dramatically ramp up testing and evaluation of all currently commercially available technologies that can actually do these jobs for us as well, and make sure that we have a glide path to operationalizing those technologies within the next 5 years so we can really start putting them to work. That is going to require some significant end stage R&D, and then it's going to require some significant testing and evaluation. And then, of course, once you have these systems, you either need to work with companies and industry partners to lease them and operate them on your behalf, or you need to acquire them, and then you need to operate them on your own behalf. And so ultimately, that's the big influx right now from a mapping perspective. Similarly, from an exploration and characterization perspective, I would be looking to figure out how to maximize the sensor suites that are on these autonomous systems so that when they're loitering either in the water column or meters above the bottom, they're gathering as much data and information as possible, both visual data, physical data, chemical data, all of which can be done to some degree today, and biological data, which is probably the holy grail of all monitoring in the ocean, particularly collecting biological data without having to retain samples, and collecting the biological information for both, not just the seen organisms that are in the ocean, but also the unseen, the microbes, the things that are small that we can't see with the eye, that require things like genomic techniques to measure. So ultimately, I would be looking to, let me just kind of wrap it up, I'd be looking to fill all the white space on any available ship that can be used to collect mapping data, and I'd be looking to dramatically increase the end stage R&D, the testing and evaluation of these systems that exist in academia and private sector and startups to make sure that we can have them operational by the middle part of this decade and put them to good work in partnership across sectors.
It sounds to me that you are certainly lined up to receive a big boost in your budget, Alan. You made a good case. So I want to go to Brad again before we open it up for potential questions from the audiences here. Take some time, Brad, and walk us through. You mentioned, I think we've talked in the past about the lack of strategies to really take on some of the key issues that you mentioned earlier on. Talk us through what the problem is and how do we get to where we want to be? Is it about people, process? Is it about the government? Is it about the private sector? What is actually needed here? Because we can't move forward without a strategy.
Yeah, thank you for that, Johann. So I've been in the conservation space my whole career, and what we learn to do as people trying to solve environmental problems is first, and protect systems, is the first thing we do is we evaluate what are the most critical stresses. And for some reason, and I really can't completely put my hand on why, the ocean science and conservation community has ignored the two most critical stresses, which are both a result of carbon pollution. Thermal stress, we're putting enormous amounts of heat into the ocean. It's changing basically every part, all of the functions of the ocean, from the most visible loss of coral reefs to sea level rise to loss of sea ice, interrupted mixing, poleward migration of species, and then this direct deposition of about 30% of all anthropogenic carbon into the ocean, changing its very chemistry. These are the two biggest stresses, but for some reason, the ocean community has said that's a climate problem. We're going to let the climate community address that. And the climate community is mostly made up of people who focus on terrestrial systems. And so they're looking at the stresses to the system and working on a target, the Paris Agreement that we negotiated, which is really wholly inadequate for oceans. And the small island developing states made that point very clearly at the Paris negotiations. So we have this overlooked problem in the oceans, which is the climate crisis. And I would say a big part of the reason that we don't have good strategies is because we don't have enough people in this narrative, you know, speaking about these problems in the way that we're trying to at Ocean Visions, which means that we don't get the kind of profile and sort of awareness that you get with other ocean issues like ocean plastics. And again, I'll come back to ocean plastics because probably if you asked a random poll globally of what the most important problem was in the oceans, people would say plastics because it's gotten enormous visibility. Yet we have really a much more dangerous pollutant going into the oceans, which is carbon at much, much higher volumes, and it doesn't get that kind of attention. So the first thing is we need to raise awareness of this issue. And then secondly, we need to start asking and answering the question, what can we do about it? And at the end of the day, there's only one durable solution to this problem, only one: reducing atmospheric CO2 and oceanic CO2. That's the only thing we can do. Everything else is a Band-Aid. Everything else is palliative. And so when we get our minds wrapped around reducing CO2 from the air and the water, then we have to start inventing the technologies. And that's where people like Dr. Yi Chao come into the mix, right? There's brilliant people all around the globe that we need to focus on this challenge. And I'll just end by saying, we just put out a series of draft technology roadmaps on Monday that we've been working on for some time. You can find them at oceanvisions.org that lay out technological pathways to develop ocean-based CDR in three big domains: macroalgae, ocean alkalinity enhancement, and electrochemical separation of CO2 from seawater. We put out a report last December under the Energy Futures Initiative banner that calls for $2 billion and 10 years of RD&D investment by the federal government into this technology development. So we really want to see that get into the, get into the federal process and get the federal establishment really engaged in cleaning up carbon pollution, because it's the only thing at the end of the day that is going to maintain a healthy living ocean.
Thanks, Brad. Carolyn, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a minute, but I'll say one thing. I've never met a person, an innovator, or someone working for a company on technology that, when provided with resources, knowledge, use cases, and support from the broader ocean and environmental community, wouldn't want to redirect or direct his or her or theirs technology and innovation towards saving the planet. And there's a huge opportunity here. I'm not worried about the solutions. I'm worried about how we get them into the field. So Carolyn, I look forward to some of the questions that you have been given on the interwebs.
Yeah, thanks, Johann, and great discussion, guys. We do have a few questions. So I'm going to start with one from Brendan Turley, and I'm going to add kind of a second part to it as well. But a big challenge currently is marine spatial planning that allows for new uses of EEZs like renewable energy, so offshore wind, but also recognize traditional uses like fishing. So what can Congress do to reduce this conflict? But then also maybe, you know, how could increased information and data on our oceans and our marine environment help with marine spatial planning that can also help reduce some of these conflicts? So Johann, why don't you pick one of our lucky panelists to answer that?
I'm going to be more democratic than that, and I'm going to let someone who feels inclined to jump in on that one raise their hand.
So, Johann, I'm happy to jump in first, and obviously if you or Brad want to jump in as well. I think first and foremost, what it starts with is this: if you don't have the information, you can't make sound decisions. If you don't know what is there, you can't make sound decisions. So from my perspective, certainly the world that I live in a day in and day out basis, making a decision about leasing and siting for offshore wind turbines, for example, is an easy decision when you know what is in the marine environment and you know how the things interact with one another. So you can use sophisticated modeling techniques, for example, to make projections and predictions about what changes might happen and what impacts might happen, and then make sound management and policy decisions about whether or not those are palatable changes that you can handle. Until you have that information, you can't come up with a fundamental balance for ocean use in any sustainable way. You might be making non-sound decisions. You also might be making decisions that benefit one sector versus another sector. And that's not, I think, what we want from a marine spatial planning perspective. As I like to joke in the ocean exploration world, you have to start a time series at some point in time. So if we haven't explored a given area, we don't have the start of that time series, and we cannot monitor change over time in any reasonable way. You also then, as a result, don't know what's there, so can't make sound decisions about how best to make use of and sustain that space. At the end of the day, we need to recognize that the ocean sustains us as humanity, and it is important for us to sustain it as humanity as well. And as a result, we need this data and this information so we can make sound decisions. I see Brad's got his hand in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I totally agree with everything you said, Alan, but I would also point out that at the end of the day, information doesn't trump politics. And, you know, I think I read a story the other day that said the U.S. has a total of 7 offshore wind platforms. I'm not sure that that's correct, but the number is startlingly low relative to how important that technology is for part of our green energy future. And the reason that we have so few is not a lack of information, at least as I understand it. It really is pure bare knuckle politics, right? Of people being able to prevent things from happening, and the people who are proponents of making things happen really struggling to overcome that barrier. We should have a massive offshore wind energy system in this country. We're way behind. And so I would just say again, you know, information's great, but we got to figure out the politics too.
Just adding very quickly what Alan has said for ocean observing. We are in a very exciting period of time, and traditionally we rely on ships, go out every quarter to do the surveys. We look using radars to look line of sight. Now, over the last decade, we have developed a number of different new technology using robotics and underwater. Now we can be there 24/7. We can really scale up the footprint. And then we are also adding more sensors on this wonderful, powerful platforms to measure the physics, the chemistry, the biology, eDNA. And then eventually we'll put acoustic sensors to monitor the sound to protect marine mammals. So I think to scale up the industry ocean observing is the excitement in the coming decades, and really provide the information to enable decision making for the policy.
Thank you. Carolyn, go ahead if you have another question or two.
Yeah, So we do have a couple more. And so I'm going to stick to the kind of renewable energy topic. And so as noted further, and we've all just reiterated this, more research on the ocean is needed. And so would NOAA or Congress more broadly support a precautionary pause of some sort on deep sea mining to be implemented until further research has been undertaken? And I know from other conversations with Dr. Chow, a lot of the materials that's going to need to go into this renewable energy sector that we're expecting to boom is in our oceans. So if we're not really sure what's happening on the seafloor, then we're not really sure what our impacts are going to be. So kind of interested to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead, Yi.
Yeah, just start. I think the industry requires innovation, so we need to find new ways to map our resources. If we have drones map the resource on land, it will be a much better way to figure out how to map our resources on the seafloor, not only map the bathymetry, but also map the resources well without physically touching the soil. So there's a number of different breakthroughs from renewable energy, robotic platforms, all the acoustic sensor interferometry sonars. There's a lot of exciting breakthroughs in the community. And then I think in the coming decade, the landscape will be quite different from what has been past decades. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, and I might add, I mean, this is an excellent question, Carolyn. I'm not sure who asked it, but deep sea mining is obviously a very pressing topic globally today, and one that has both political and resource implications. One of the interesting things is that I believe firmly that the greatest strategic reserves of critical minerals in the world exist in our oceans and in the seabed. However, we also have less than 5 locations in the world that have long-term research studies to understand the implications of mining those resources. What little information that we do know indicates that, at least from a local flora and fauna perspective, nothing grows back. Okay, this is after decades of repeat work. But again, there's only a couple of these sites globally that have been studied. My office, in partnership with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the U.S. Geological Survey, will be going back to one of these sites later this year on an expedition on the NOAA ship Oceanus Explorer as one of the near-term implementation activities for the national strategy to map, explore, and characterize the USEZ. We recognize that there is a need and a desire globally to have more wind and solar power. But doing so will require magnets, and they will require batteries, and they will require rare earth elements and critical minerals. And those have supply chain issues today that are dominated by individual nations in many cases. And those are compelling political, geopolitical issues, as well as environmental issues. I don't know how we stop the progress for deep sea mining in the short term. I sincerely hope that at the very least, we work with those that are seeking to do this work to concomitantly conduct the research and the monitoring and the evaluation at the earliest sites to truly understand the local and potentially non-local impacts of deep sea mining.
Maybe just add one thing. I totally agree with what both my fellow panelists just said. The only thing I would add is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? And so ultimately, we are looking to build technologies for green energy that require these elements and minerals. And right now we're getting them from terrestrial sources, and some of those are pretty horrific from an environmental standpoint. At the end of the day, we're going to have to either invent new ways to build these machines, or we're going to have to take the least cost, environmental cost alternative to charting out future paths. And that's a hard thing to do because we're very sectorally focused. So people who focus on the oceans aren't paying attention to what copper mines do on land generally. But we need to have whole systems thinking as we approach the future.
Carolyn, do you want to do one more question before we bring this to a close? Although I have a sense that we could probably go for another 2-3 hours, but maybe our panelists and our audience have other things to do on this Thursday. I don't know.
Yeah. No, we do have our chat. I'm excited about the chat. We've got, thanks to you for everyone for your input. And also the last question was asked by Liz Holloway, and I apologize, I didn't reference that at the beginning. So let's just do one more. And again, there are a few others. So I will have my email put in the chat. So I'm happy to connect anyone who's listening with any of the panelists with any follow-up questions or thoughts, or even just conversations since we can't get to it with time. So we'll go do one last question from Joshua Berger. And he says, so what mechanisms can be put in place to coordinate across the relevant federal agencies? Each agency has their own siloed priority that don't seem to be aligning. So kind of what's your thoughts? I think it also touches maybe on some of the legislation that some of our Senate leaders earlier have proposed. So maybe Alan should start with this one.
Sure, Carolyn. Obviously, being a federal government representative here, I'm happy to jump in from the agency perspective. Some of the things that have been put into place recently are meant to address these things. First, the National Ocean Mapping, Exploration, and Characterization Council, which I co-chair, was established just this past year as one of the first priorities coming out of the development of a strategy to fully map, explore, and characterize the US EEZ. That is intended to get us to work better across agencies, to understand each other's needs, and to identify projects that we may be able to jointly execute, ideally at lower cost, and more often than not in partnership with other sectors to truly understand these areas. So that's one area. Another one is, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act that recently got passed, the National Oceanographic Partnership Program was reauthorized. That program was established decades ago, literally focused on getting agencies to partner across one another together on pressing issues in the ocean domain where they both have equities in stake, or multiple agencies have equities in stake, and bringing them together. Recent efforts are looking to evolve that National Oceanographic Partnership Program activities to be not just an agency-focused activity, but one where we can invite academia and the private sector and the philanthropic sector to the table as well to figure out how to address some of the most pressing ocean issues of our day together. So those are a couple of examples, and I think that some of the recently introduced legislation is looking to bolster some of this. The National Ocean Exploration Act looks to further codify the Ocean Policy Committee and the National Ocean Mapping, Exploration, and Characterization Council. And one of the challenges that we face, though, on the agency side, and I think a lot of people don't understand this challenge, is that it is very difficult for agencies to commingle resources. So one agency cannot easily share its dollars with another agency to execute a project that they want to execute jointly. That remains a challenge. I don't know that there's an easy solution because of the complications from an appropriations process perspective, and wanting to make sure that government agencies don't cede the decision-making authority over federally appropriated dollars. But that is a fundamental challenge that we face today that the Congress has been talking about.
Maybe just to add one thing from my perspective, having struggled with this with the Puget Sound Recovery Program, which was basically trying to coordinate 10 state agencies, 5 federal agencies, and cities, counties, and tribes across the Puget Sound Basin. One thing I learned very clearly, if you want an interagency effort to work, either give it authority or give it money. But if you don't give it either of those two things, it's very likely not going to work, because we all respond to where the lines of authority are, and the lines of appropriation and spending. And so we've created far too many interagency task forces that don't have any teeth, and therefore it's purely voluntary and advisory, and they don't work. So I think history reflects that pretty clearly. The couple that we've created that really do have teeth, the California Coastal Commission, for example, things happen, they get done.
Dr. Chow, you want to say anything before we try to wrap up here? If not, that's also okay.
Yeah, just from someone working on the ground, and I'm one of the beneficiaries of this NOPP program Alan talked about, National Oceanographic Partnership Program. This multi-agency collaboration does have money and call for proposals for the industry, academia, government working together have to be 2 of the 3 as a requirement to be part of the enterprise. So that's one of the successful examples I can testify, and then I'm benefiting, developing the technology to enable the industry and improve the knowledge as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Carol, I'll hand it over to you in a second here. I thought it was interesting we landed on authority and money, basically. You know, I always used to think that you needed leadership and urgency before you get to the authority and the money. So we have graduated from leadership and urgency into now asking for authority and money, which is a huge leap over the last couple of years. And I think if we move forward here and start to think about nature through a more geopolitical lens, environmental issues are no longer, and frankly never have been or should have been, a fringe issue. It's going to impact everything that we do over the next 10 years or 10,000 years if we get it right. If we don't, it might not be 10,000 years or even 100. So continuing to frame these issues the way this panel has, the way ICCF does, the way Senator Wicker's and Senator White does in sort of the geopolitical framework, I think will be incredibly important. So again, thanks to the panel, thanks to ICCF, and Carolyn, over to you with 1 minute and 22 seconds to make a bold statement for the oceans moving forward.
Thanks, Johann. I'm just going to say a big thank you to the panelists and Johann for moderating a great discussion. We'll just wrap it up. Reminder, my email is in the chat. So if you have any burning questions or need to connect with any of the panelists, I'd be happy to make that introduction. Until next time, guys, thanks so much.